Welcome to my presentation entitled Expert Cricket Coaches' Sources of Knowledge for Coaching the Fast Bowling Technique. I'm Harvey Anderson, a Senior Lecturer and Researcher at the Academy of Sport and Physical Activity, Sheffield Hallam University in the United Kingdom. And we're looking at the bowler role within cricket. So as you can see from the diagram here, quite similar to a baseball pitcher, with the key difference being that the bowler has a run up, so they will run for, on average, around about 20 metres or so, run into the crease, bowl the ball and follow through past the line. Similar to javelin, or also long jump, where the foot needs to be behind the line. However, differently to javelin, they can keep on going down the wicket, and we'll look a little bit more at that later on. So the structure of this presentation, first I will obviously go through the purpose of the study, where it sits within a series of other studies, and going through the standard methods, results and discussion. I'm also going to touch upon the impact that COVID has had, both directly in this study but also going forward in terms of how coaches operate and how coaches are going to look to operate, and the potential legacy that COVID has brought us, and then finally some ideas for going forward, particularly for research but also for coach education and coach development. Firstly, I need to point out that this is only a small part of a much larger study, which is part of my doctoral thesis, where I'm investigating expert coaches' conceptions of the fast bowling technique in cricket. That is, what they think the technique actually is and how they go about coaching it, and finally how they know these things, which is the kind of the purpose of this study. I also want to publicly thank my two excellent supervisors, Professor Keith Davids and Dr. Andrew Barnes, both currently staff at Sheffield Hallam University. I also want to acknowledge the amazing community of fast bowling coaches that are out there. I have to acknowledge Stephen Jones and his Pace Lab work. This is his diagram here. But again, as we've seen in the study, there's quite a lot of interaction between fast bowling coaches from around the world to enhance coaches' knowledge. So, methods for this study. 19 expert cricket coaches from around the world were enlisted in the study. To be considered an expert, they needed to be working with players at the highest professional domestic level, so first class cricket and international cricketers, both male and female. Semi-structured interviews were used with the same 5 key question areas. Interviews lasted on average between 15 and up to 45 minutes, on average around about 25 minutes. Thematic analysis was carried out following Braun and Clark's work. And from that we discovered, was revealed 7 first order themes and 8 second order themes. Okay, the participants of this study, a brief overview of their careers here. You can see that the vast majority are former elite players that have gone on to be high performance coaches working in the elite fields of cricket at both first class and international level. Within this, there are also a number of former and current lead fast bowling coaches, national fast bowling coaches, which means it's the highest possible position you can hold as a fast bowling coach within each of these countries. So overall, a really high caliber field of coaches were obtained for this study. So, coaches' sources of knowledge. The first order themes were observation of other expert fast bowlers, experience gained by the coaches, other professional knowledge education, conversations with other experts, self-directed study, coach education and personal theory and experimentation. The second order themes, players gained experience from both, the coaches gained experience from both being a player and as a coach. Other professional knowledge came from sports science and within that the medical staff, depending on the institute that these coaches worked, along with S&C coaches. The conversation with the experts within their field, so other fast bowling coaches as well as fast bowlers themselves, and self-directed studies tended to be from a sports science background or from other sports such as, but not exclusively, baseball, pitching and javelin throwing. So, experiential learning has long been cited within literature as pretty essential for both developing coaching knowledge and for developing coaching in general. Within this study, it's clear that coaches gain knowledge from both being, in most instances, but not exclusively, being an elite player themselves. And then quite often, for the majority of the coaches, they'd then been fast-tracked into elite performance coaching as fast bowling coaches. So basically learnt on the job through doing lots and lots of coaching. So again, something that Coach 19 here alludes to, that he's built years and years of coaching lots of different people at different levels. Coach 7 had noted as they'd become more experienced, they actually started to understand it more, again through this experience of just actually being in there. Very interestingly, Coach 12's admission here that basically when they started, they didn't have a clue what they were doing. This is not uncommon, certainly from experience, but appears to be not that well noted in the literature. So we've got coaches who have gone from being elite performers straight into high performance coaching, whilst having knowledge as a player, don't have a great deal of knowledge as a coach. So they're limited in what they can do. So as Coach 12 here admits, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a clue. So I just stuck to the basic tactics. And then as I progressed, I started adding a little bit more technique work. Another of the coaches within this study admitted that he knew nothing about biomechanics and hoped that he would then start to learn some when he went on his level 4 coaching qualification. Okay, so some interesting stuff going on. So experiential knowledge really important, and these elite coaches are getting and starting out and being fast-tracked into elite coaching positions without actually having a coaching knowledge or a coaching background. So as well as learning through actually doing the job, quite often coaches look to work with other professions and professionals. Key areas of staff being in and around sports science, and within that I include the medical staff and also the strength and conditioning coaches. They tended to follow an interdisciplinary approach, and that's particularly around players who had injuries and were returning back to full fitnesses. Although, however, some coaches did work alongside strength and conditioning coaches in particular, as they saw this idea of building athleticism of being absolutely essential to both fast bowling performance as well as injury prevention. So as Coach here 12 said, speaking to physios in conjunction with the S&Cs, just trying to get their take on things. Coach 18 said they taught lots to doctors and physios again to build up some idea of kind of workloads as well as the kind of the technical patterns and so on that bowlers could and should be able to withstand. One area that came through and throughout the study, I'd say particularly with the English coaches, but not exclusively, was this idea of communities of practice. Coaches talk to other coaches. They also talk to lots of fast bowlers, both current and past, and it's through these conversations and bouncing ideas off one another that these coaches developed their knowledge and developed kind of coaching practices. So a number of coaches talked about speaking to another coach for having drills or identifying common problems. Quite often with the nature of international cricket and franchise cricket that's coming about now, quite often players will play for a number of different franchises in different parts of the world in different competitions, so different coaches can see the same player in different countries, and so they can then obviously pass on from what they've done in one place to another coach in another place. So yeah, again, his coach is giving examples of that they've actually gone out of their way to talk to other coaches to really kind of understand that, and the coaches clearly valued this. Again, a number of them really expressed how important it was to them to be able to do this. So it's certainly from the English coaches' perspective, there seemed to be quite a good community of the fast bowling coaches working with the lead fast bowling coach in the ECB at their centre of excellence, and then as players work with these coaches, information was being shared between the respective coaches. Pretty much all of the coaches reverted to pointed out that actually they'd gained a lot of information just by observing experts, so both current experts and experts from the past, and they looked at them. For a number of the coaches, although not all, they then used these experts as their kind of technical templates and built their coaching practice in and around that. So as Coach 1 alludes to here, looking at hundreds of bowlers of the best bowlers and then comparing these with their bowlers and just to see if was there anything that the experts were doing that these current crop weren't, and then kind of creating coaching interventions accordingly. Here, Coach 3 talks about expert fast bowlers from the past, so Dennis Lee and Jeff Thompson, who were very famous and feared fast bowlers from Australia back in the late 1970s up to the mid-1980s. So again, looking at what experts have done, how they've done it, etc., and using those as a template when working with their current crop of fast bowlers. Not surprisingly, coach education gets a mention. So for a number of the coaches, particularly the English coaches, formal coach education seemed to be very important. A number of the coaches actually spoke about that, and they spoke about what the ECB have called the fast bowling matrix. So this is a kind of a technical template that is used for both the analysis of fast bowlers and then as a template for interventions going forward. This also seemed to be a key vehicle for these coaches to actually access the research, the empirical findings that's out there. Whereas for other coaches, it was something that they tended to do themselves. So here we've got Coach 5, who was actually an Indian coach. He spoke about kind of the stuff that he did and the people the way that he worked and how important it was. Coach 1 here talking about this kind of the idea of this level 4, the communities of practice that we talked about in the previous slide, and kind of both the formal education in terms of level 4, but also CPD opportunities that the ECB provide from them, and this idea of dripping down information from the lead coach down to these other elite fast bowling coaches. But again, this level 4 appears to be really important to the elite English coaches. Self-directed study was also very, very important. So a number of coaches went away to study further, to enhance their own knowledge and to enhance their coaching ability and to hopefully enhance the performance of players, etc. Particularly, this seemed to be particularly important to the more experienced coaches. So the national leads were the guys who seem to be doing this a lot as well. Sports science seemed to be very important, obviously particularly biomechanics, but also coaches looked to other fields such as previously mentioned, javelin throwing, baseball pitching, and then kind of track and field, sprinting, and also long jump was mentioned. So here Coach 15, who basically went out to the States. He actually went to try out as a pitcher in baseball, take his skills that he learned from cricket, see if he could put it into baseball. And from there he discovered that actually coaches were strongly linked and working with biomechanists and the idea of biomechanical principles, something that in baseball had been doing since the 1950s and 60s. We're talking in the 1980s. Cricket hadn't caught on to this yet and hadn't till quite some time later. A couple of the coaches also had the sports science background. Some had the sports science before becoming a coach. Another went on to study sports science once he retired and decided to become a coach. Coach 18 was an Australian coach. Actually delved into the empirical literature out there. Coach 18 is a national lead fast bowling coach in his native country Australia, but was also a fast bowling coach in another country as well. And then Coach 13, who basically sees himself as a student and is constantly looking to learn and going out to find these kind of self-directed opportunities to learn more about coaching and related material, related areas that could be useful and enhance their performances as a fast bowling coach. Okay, personal theory and experimentation. This was really critical for a number of coaches. Coach 15 actually has written a number of books and has created his own coaching system. But again, the more experienced coaches and those who are kind of the national leads all had their own personal theories to go alongside the knowledge that they created from the other sources. These tended to be around certain elements of either the technique. So I'm going to talk about the centre of mass, others the knee, the rear knee. So for a right-handed bowler, the right knee as they come through, and others kind of the head and where that goes. But here we're saying Coach 17, there's no actual data, there's no science behind what I've done. I'm not a biomechanist. I just know that the body follows the head. Again, so it's a personal theory. Here, Coach 7, so whilst my theory has probably never been scientifically tested on my behalf, I think the fact that it's very data-driven and from a biomechanist and the science side of things, it fits really well with what I look for, and it's kind of proven in some respects. So again, these coaches are taking ideas from other areas and formulating their own theories from that. A number of coaches talked about trial and error, particularly in their coaching pedagogies and their coaching interventions. So they will try a certain approach to that, and they'll try another, and they'll keep trying and chipping away until they found approaches that work with certain bowlers. Going off this study area, but into the other studies, coaches talked a lot about individuality. And try to find out what worked best for the individual bowler. So again, it's this idea of trial and error and just trying to find a way. So, things that we found. Well, firstly, most of these findings have already been found in other academic literature. Ideas of kind of formal, informal learning that are open to coaches and how they use it. The cohort in this study, the majority had been fast-tracked from being an elite player into coaching elite players. So they'd gone from kind of player to high performance. Now, looking at in the literature, fast-tracking has its advantages. So Beckett, Evans and Pye got a really nice paper in 2017 talk about why it's quite often the best way, because coaches tend to just fit in. They have the habitus, they understand the elite sport environment, they understand the game from a tactical and technical perspective. They understand the players in terms of experience and what it's like to be in these kind of situations, and they tend to automatically have the respect from other players or the current players because they've actually been successful as a player. And again, this cohort fit with that. However, McMahon, amongst a number of researchers, have pointed out actually there's some real disadvantages to this fast tracking. So quite often coaches will copy the coaching approaches and coaching practices that they received as a player, which can lead for not only just kind of poor practices, but even up to abusive practices that have been in the past, and these can just continue to be seen as, well, this is how we do it, not whether it's right or not, but this is what we're doing. Also, that came out of this study was a clear acknowledgement that a number of these coaches went straight into coaching and knew nothing about coaching, and felt that they had an inadequate knowledge and skill base to be able to cope with that. So they're kind of thrown in at the deep end without the necessarily kind of knowledge and skill base to work in this different field. And they clearly recognised that coaching was a very different field to being a player. Other things that came out, so formal coach education seemed to be really important, again particularly for the English coaches, as it seemed to provide them access to empirical literature, which a number have alluded to they probably wouldn't have looked at other way. However, particularly coaches from other countries who didn't have this level of support in terms of formal coach education, that seemed to be a catalyst for them to actually go out and find things out themselves. And if you look at it again, another really good paper by Crowther and colleagues, 2018, this idea of kind of self-knowledge and self-experimentation and self-development lead to a greater sophistication in the knowledge that they gain, which leads to better decision-making. So there are potential issues there of how do we drive this? How do we get coaches to invest in themselves, their own learning and knowledge? All coaches clearly valued a community of practice. They really valued speaking to other coaches as experts to be able to kind of bounce ideas around or kind of find shortcuts and solutions, etc. And then finally, as Greenwood, Davies and Renshaw have demonstrated, experiential knowledge is a critical part of coach development. Therefore, more studies looking at coaches' experiential knowledge is critical for the field. Impact of COVID. Well, COVID wasn't directly studied within this, but a number of references to COVID came out, not least the coaches not being able to physically meet a number of players. Those that were in their own little bubbles, again, which had its issues in terms of how they would communicate normally. Coaches tended to then move towards online methods of being able to communicate with their players, so video conferencing, FaceTime on mobile phones, etc., because coaches deem the need to still build and maintain coach-athlete relationships were really, really important. Another thing that seems to have developed and become almost a legacy of COVID is a number of more linked global learning events, so lots of kind of webinars, seminars online, lots of open discussion, Q&As, people bouncing ideas around from one another via these means seem to have kind of caught on for a lot of the coaches, and could well be something that continues to happen in the future, so quite potential positive legacy from COVID. So where next? For me, three kind of key areas need to be looked at further from this study. So firstly, formal coach education. What should actually be in it? This idea of coaches, using coach education to gain interaction with empirical studies rather than finding it themselves. Are we creating a reliance there? How do we actually get coaches then to build their own theories? How do we get them to be evidence informed in their practices? And how can formal coach education actually be part of that? Fast tracking elite players into coaching. There's a real question mark here. So while there clearly are a number of key advantages of fast tracking elite players into coaching in an elite environment, should they actually serve some form of apprenticeship? A number of coaches said they didn't really know what they were doing. They've just been thrown in at the deep end, so they've just tried to kind of do what they'd done as a player and use their kind of tactical advice from there. With that in mind, what can both the coach education and the research communities do to actually provide some assistance or scaffolding for these coaches if they are being fast-tracked across without the knowledge and skill base that they could really do with? And finally, in terms of coach development, how do we get more out of formal education and self-directed study? They're both clearly important, so how do we do better with that? How can we assist coaches to objectively evaluate their personal theories? It's okay having a personal theory, but if we don't objectively test it, we don't know if that theory is any good. And again, going back to kind of the stuff that we talked about before in terms of the potential for poor practices to continue, as that's what they'd experienced, so that it's kind of passed on to follow it. And then finally, what do coaches themselves want in terms of their coach development? So my contact details, email, ResearchGate, and LinkedIn. And this presentation is also on YouTube. Thank you for your time listening, and hopefully that's been of some use to you.